If you've been watching the Colorado trial of People versus Letecia Stauch, is it just me or is Letecia sitting over there at the defense table looking like Wednesday from the Addams Family as she uses her black hair to cover her face, probably wishing that the ground would open up and swallow her whole? Yeah, that's not going to happen because she must sit there and take it. All right, everyone, this is a recap of Letecia's trial week 1. I can't decide if I was shocked that Al Stauch was the first witness to testify at trial, but strategically, it was a great call. You have to remember, the jury isn't like us true crime junkies where they've been following Letecia Stauch's trial from the beginning. They technically don't know anything about the case, so introducing Letecia's ex-husband, but most importantly, the victim's father, was a clutch move by the prosecution. During Al's testimony, we learned that he met Letecia in 2014. They moved in together later that year in the middle of 2014. When Letecia and Al first got together, he didn't have full custody of his 2 children. They were with Landon, the children's mother. Al was prior enlisted and he made it to the rank of Sergeant First Class. And then in 2016, he got his officer's commission. In 2017, Al was transferred to Fort Greely in Alaska, and he was an active Guard member at that time. It was right before he left to Alaska that he filed for official custody of the 2 children. During their initial years together, Al and Letecia, he described his relationship with her as rocky, but he really thought all relationships are like this, so he didn't really give it a second thought. He described on the stand how one time Letecia got really mad at him about something. She put all his things out in the front yard, and he went and he picked up his things, and they didn't speak for about a week. While testifying, Al called this tough times. Al also described that when he and Letecia were together in Alaska, Letecia absolutely hated it there. One time, or oftentimes, she would just say, "We, the U.S., should give Alaska back to Russia." This was kind of comical, and it reminded me of that time that Sarah Palin was like, "I can see Russia from my house." Do you guys remember that? Anyway, through Al's testimony, the state was able to present evidence that Letecia Stauch was a manipulative woman. And when I say manipulative, I mean it. They presented evidence that while they were in Alaska, Letecia went as far as filing or lodging 2 complaints against 2 of Al's coworkers. One was a captain and one was a lieutenant colonel. It doesn't matter whether the allegations were true or false, although the insinuation was that they probably weren't completely accurate. But all of this happened and it manipulated Al into requesting a move, and that's when he was transferred to Colorado. Of the allegation that these 2 officers had sexually harassed her, Al said that it made him really uncomfortable and it made his work life really uncomfortable, which is why he requested the move. During the presentation of this evidence of the manipulation, the defense lodged a 404B objection. A 404B objection is the presentation of evidence of other wrongdoings, and usually the defense needs to get notice that this evidence is going to come out. So they basically were like, "We didn't get notice, what's going on?" But the state countered the objection by saying, "Hey, we're presenting this information to go towards Letecia's mental state. And hello, the defense has put her mental state at issue by pleading not guilty by reason of insanity." And with that, the judge allowed the evidence to come out. During Al's testimony, we learned of various occasions when Letecia lied to her husband. One time, she told him she was pregnant with twins, allegedly his. She even sent him a sonogram picture, and it turns out Letecia never gave birth to twins, and he's not aware of any time that she actually miscarried. One time, $8,000 of family money went missing, and they went around and in circles, and eventually, about a couple of weeks later, Letecia finally admitted that she was the one who took the money. Also in 2019, Letecia filed complaints that her house had been burgled, and it turns out it hadn't. One time, she told Al that she shot one of their family weapons down a storm well, and when Al went to look, he never found evidence of a shot being fired. Al presented evidence that the family did have a handful of weapons in the home. Al presented evidence that at some point they did go to counseling. She also was seeing mental health. And also, Letecia had basically convinced Al to take Gannon to seek therapy as well. Al admitted that Letecia was closer to his younger daughter, but he said that Gannon was a mama's boy. Not only did he love his biological mother, but Al believed that Gannon was pretty close to Letecia as well. And you have to remember, Gannon was 11 when he went missing and was murdered, and she had been in his life for 6 years already, so at least from the age of 5. Al also admitted that at some point Letecia made an allegation that Gannon had come at her, but Al says that he never found proof of this. Al told the jury that in 3 years, Letecia held 8 different jobs. Basically, she would leave claiming some sort of issue with the employment. Al said Letecia was always bumping heads with everyone, and in her most recent couple of jobs, she would go into a position as a teacher or whatever it was, but she would think that she was overqualified for that position and that she should have a higher position because of her education. Oddly, Al also presented a lot of evidence of stuff that he had never heard from Letecia, which leads me to believe that the prosecution is going to present evidence of other lies that Letecia has told other people, and they were using Al to show that as her husband who lived with her, he had never heard of these things. But this is what they kind of got out. While Al and Letecia did do a lot of traveling, he confirmed that they had never been together, or even he had never heard that she had been to Australia, to Colombia, or really anywhere. He knew that she had been to the Caribbean, but he had never heard that she had specifically been to Jamaica. He had never heard a story of Letecia telling him that she woke up in a tent surrounded by cartel members. In addition to all of this, Al admitted that the family did have financial problems, particularly because Letecia Stauch thought that she should be living like Kim Kardashian. Yes, according to him, she wanted to live above their means. And Letecia was constantly accusing Al of cheating. With Al on the stand, the state asked him questions about the storage unit that they had in the basement, specifically about what luggage they had in there. They established that there was a large green suitcase in that storage closet. Specifically, this green suitcase, Al remembered it because it was Landon's aunt, a woman by the name of Veronica. One time, they ended up bringing it home and they just kept it. So early on in Al's direct examination, Al described that once he found out his son was missing, he came home early from his temporary assignment in Oklahoma. When he got to the Colorado Springs airport, Letecia was there to pick him up. He was a little bit shocked because she was in a different vehicle, and he was like, hey, what's going on? What is this? And she told him that she had rented this vehicle because she didn't want to put more miles on her car. Al thought that was odd because he was like, we have a missing son. Who the hell cares about the miles on your car? So he basically didn't make a big deal about it. He was just like, where's your car? She told him she left it parked at the school. With this information, he basically lodged it in the back of his head for later. Back at the house, less than 24 hours since Gannon had been reported missing, Al got word that someone thought they spotted Gannon at a gas station in the city of Fountain. So he hauled booty all the way to this gas station. He got the security footage, and sure enough, there was a young boy seen on the surveillance video, but it wasn't Gannon. So Al left the gas station and he was just wandering aimlessly looking for his son. And then he remembered what Letecia said, that her car had been parked at the school. So he drove to the school, drove around the parking lot 3 times looking for Letecia's car and never saw it. Immediately, he knew something was wrong. So he contacted law enforcement and was like, hey, something's not right. You have to look into my wife. So honestly, when I was watching the trial, I thought immediately that Al was an MVP for his son's case. And I think we'll see this play out throughout the trial, that there's going to be a lot of MVPs in this case. So on January 29th, Al calls Letecia into the living room and he's like, tell me exactly what happened. And this is when, for the first time, Al hears about this guy named Eduardo, how she gave her garage code to some strange guy who was going to repair a carpet, and how he assaulted her, took the son, etc., etc. Al was completely stumped. He was like, okay, so if there was this big attack, where's all the blood? And Letecia was like, well, I cleaned it up. Al's not believing anything she's saying, though. So it's either that day or the following day when Letecia leaves the house. She comes back because she's not going to be staying at the house anymore. She retrieves some of her items, but before Al will even let her into the house, he calls the deputies to come and basically just supervise the situation because he just feels some sort of way about Letecia. While Al was on the stand, the state presented at least 2 pretext phone calls between Al and Letecia Stauch. Now, you have to remember, at some point, the FBI had approached Al and they were like, hey, do you want to participate in these pretext calls where we record any conversations that you have with Letecia? Of course, Al wants to find his son. He already knows his wife is a shady bee, so he agrees to it. The first pretext call that they introduced is from February 13th. You can actually go and stream those phone calls so that you can listen to all of them. But on day 2 of trial, you can hear almost all of this February 13th phone call. Day 2 of the trial ended with almost towards the end of that February 13th pretext call. Day 3 of trial began with the February 13th pretext call. They also introduced a February 14th pretext call. And the pretext calls, y'all, are just off the chain. They are insane. You can't even believe that this is happening when you're listening. During these calls, Letecia does bring up this guy named Eduardo, but then she makes up 4 different versions of what happened. And some of these versions include a criminal by the name of Quincy Brown. Now, at one point during this conversation, she's talking about Quincy Brown, and Al is like, Letecia, I just Googled Quincy Brown. You literally found him on the internet. And she's like, no, I didn't. And Al is literally going insane on her because at first, the first phone call, you can tell he just kind of got his baby gloves on. He's treating her. He wants to get as much information as possible. But then by the second pretext call, he is like going head to head with this woman. At one point, she yells out, oh my gosh, do you got me on speakerphone? Who's there? Why do you got me on speakerphone? And then at another point, she's like, am I on trial? Am I on trial? And she is just going berserk. During one of the pretext calls, Letecia tells Al that she's not willing to talk anymore until she gets immunity. And Al is like, I can't give you immunity. And no kidding, Letecia is like, well, you can ask them. And he's like, what? During day 3 of the trial, we continue with Letecia being manipulative, but Al also says, hey, listen, I never really thought anything about it. I never got any weird feelings about it, and I allowed her to help me discipline the children. Although he doesn't really go into how they discipline the children, he does mention that they would take away TV time and electronics and things like that. Of course, Al is like, never in a million years would I have imagined that my wife would hurt any of my children. And he also says, hey, listen, my duty in the military is not something that I have to go or I'm going to get in trouble. He very clearly says, if I needed to rearrange my travel days or my military duty, I would have done that if I thought that Letecia was suffering from some sort of mental break. Al did admit that during the time that Gannon went missing that afternoon, he did try to reach out to Gannon and that Gannon never got back to him. He did find that strange. Al's testimony lasted about a day and a half on the stand, but most of that time was spent listening to pretext phone calls. The second witness called in Letecia's trial was a man by the name of Macon Ponder. Mr. Ponder is a Florida bridge inspector, and he described that bridges need to be inspected every 2 years. By happenstance, on March 17th, 2020, the Escambia River Bridge needed to be inspected. He arrived there with his partner, and as soon as he arrived, underneath the bridge, kind of like weirdly stacked or on its side, he saw a green suitcase. He and his partner decided, hey, let's start this inspection and then we'll come back to check it out. Mind you, he didn't have to check it out. He even says he did it out of curiosity. So about an hour and a half into their bridge inspection, they're back in this area when all of a sudden Mr. Ponder remembers the suitcase. He turns around, goes back, and him and his partner walk towards it. It's kind of in a little marshy of an area. And so Mr. Ponder reaches to grab the suitcase, which is like a full-size suitcase. And as he goes to pull it up, he realizes like, this is heavy. He turns around, he tells his partner, this is a really heavy suitcase. He's already getting kind of like the heebie-jeebies. He pulls the green suitcase out of the marshy area and he lays it flat. Before he even opens it, he looks at his partner and they kind of come up with a game plan like, oh my gosh, like what could possibly be in here? Mr. Ponder then reaches down and begins to unzip the suitcase. And that's when he's smacked in the face with the smell of death. Now, he starts to think, okay, could it be like a litter of puppies or something? Because he has said that sometimes people do. They have litters of puppies, they throw them in bags and they just toss them, which I know everyone is going to be devastated by when they watch this video. But he says that the smell coming out of that suitcase is even worse than that. And as he unzips the entire suitcase and opens it up, the first thing he sees are little feet with football socks on them. He says he is immediately just like taken aback. He sees that there's a body in there. He can't tell if it's a boy or a girl. He knows it's kind of a smaller framed body, and they immediately call 911. Next on the stand is Jason Yoder. Now, he's a major crimes division detective. Mind you, they don't know that Gannon is missing because this is Florida. So he reports to the scene of this body being discovered. He sees the body. He can tell it's a child. He goes back to his office and he basically just starts doing a Google search of missing children. I think he kind of checks the Florida state and then he does like just a regular missing persons case search. And as soon as he does that, one of the first pictures that comes up is Janine Stauch's missing persons flyer. And immediately when Mr. Yoder sees this picture, something about Gannon's teeth sticks out at him. Mind you, he has seen the body. It's probably has been highly decomposed. And he's like, something is going on here. The next day, he attends the autopsy for the body discovered in that green suitcase. And as soon as he sees the teeth again, he just kind of knows. He contacts the Colorado Springs Police Department to say, hey, can you guys come? We think we may have found this boy that you've been looking for. And that's how Mr. Yoder was able to put together that the body found in Florida was Janine Stauch, missing 1,300 miles away from Colorado Springs, Colorado. Next on the stand are two El Paso sheriff's deputies. One testifies to discovering carpet brushes and scissors in the Stauch dishwasher, and they testified that Gannon's blood was found on the carpet brushes that had already been run through the wash at least once. The final witness, as I mentioned, was another cop. He wore a body camera when responding to Letecia's house for the report of a runaway. He laid the foundation, and his body-worn camera was introduced as evidence at the trial. They played the video. And that was it for day 3. On day 4 of trial, Kelly Smith, who's a crime scene investigator and a former 911 dispatcher, she was called to the stand. She was employed with the Santa Rosa County in Florida, and she was one of the crime scene investigators called to Gannon's case when they discovered the green suitcase. Trevor Seifert was a Florida senior lab crime analyst, and he testified about evidence gathering in Gannon's case. Alex Pack testified next, and she was a hotel employee who testified that on February 4th, Letecia Stauch checked into her hotel room in Pensacola, Florida, just after midnight. She checked out at 11 a.m. that same day. So she was in by midnight, she was out by 11 a.m. Lieutenant Jason Hess with the El Paso County Sheriff's Office, he testified, and he was one of the very first responders to respond to Gannon's missing persons report at Letecia's house. He said that when he arrived there, he was kind of asking, like, which way did Gannon go? Like, did he go left? Did he go right? Like, where did he go? And Letecia couldn't point him in any direction. He did point out that he did question Gannon's little sister, who was 8 years old at the time, and that she kind of made something up. She was trying to help. And she was like, if he was going anywhere, he would have went that way or whatever it was. So I think what we were trying to get at was that even the little girl was being more helpful in trying to find her brother than Letecia was. Leslie Hicks was next on the stand. She was an assistant principal with the Mount Rich Middle School. She testified that she helped to interview Letecia to get the job as a resource officer. And something that I discovered for the first time while watching the trial was that Letecia had just started her job with the Mount Rich Middle School. And when I say just, I mean just. Gannon went missing on Monday, January 27th, and she started her first day at that school on Friday, January 24th. So Miss Hicks testified that when she received a text message between 3 and 4 a.m. on Monday, January 27th, she was a little bit shocked. But the text message that Letecia sent her read as follows. I'm sorry for the time of night message, but my stepfather passed away. Someone hit him with a car while he was walking. I can update you at a later time. Miss Hicks basically was like, I'm so sorry for your loss. And then she asked a follow-up question. Hey, are we going to need a substitute teacher for your class? And then Letecia just got angry and she was like, yes, of course. Like, I would think that that's like common sense. And Miss Hicks was like, okay. Well, that was the last time that Letecia ever contacted Miss Hicks. An El Paso County Sheriff's officer by the name of Parker, his body-worn video was introduced at trial. The video presented the police's initial belief that Gannon was a runaway due to the things that Letecia was saying. Now, Letecia can be heard saying on video, quote, I'm almost positive he is with someone he knows because he searched on his phone. Can my parents find me if my phone is off? End quote. The cops on video can be heard saying that Gannon's missing persons report, which mind you, it had only been 4 or 5 hours. They were saying that his missing persons report was already going viral. And now we'll learn a little bit more about why the police officer thought this. But outside the house in Larson Ranch, there were already at least 40 people out on foot looking for little missing Gannon. During Parker's video, which you can hear when you're watching it, you can hear it, but you can't really watch too much of it. But you can hear Officer Parker talk about how Al received a weird text message from his son talking about bath salts and then also about playing Sonic at his friend's house. They also mentioned that there was a basketball game at the school that night, so they were going to go follow up there, thinking that maybe Gannon left the house to go to that basketball game. Sergeant Chris Gainstein was an undercover agent, so he was with the El Paso Sheriff's Department, but he was responsible for conducting a covert mission while watching Letecia. Okay, so they track her down on January 30th. They track her down to a house, and outside this house is a white Jetta. The white Jetta belongs to Letecia's daughter, Harley. Officer Chris describes on the stand how he witnesses the mother-daughter duo exit this house that they had under surveillance. It's not the actual house where she used to live with her husband. It's a different house. They watch her exit the house and the two of them get into the white Jetta. However, it's very strange. Harley gets into the driver's seat and Letecia gets into the back seat. Immediately, she starts ducking and she's kind of laying low in the back seat, laying down. And then she kind of peeks her head up in the window, just to see a little bit. And now Officer Chris is this is weird. She is clearly trying to evade being seen. The officers who are conducting the surveillance then follow Letecia and her daughter into a store parking lot. So it's kind of like a plaza. They witness the mother-daughter duo park their vehicle and then go. While Officer Chris is outside with all the other vehicles that are undercover, they get word from the precinct that they got a search warrant for the white Jetta and also for a cell phone. Chris and his team are then instructed to get out of surveillance mode and to basically execute these warrants. So Chris starts talking to the other folks and he's like, hey, we're going to do a soft approach. We don't want to cause a scene. We just need to get the keys to the Jetta and we need to get the phone. But all hell breaks loose, kinda, when Letecia exits the store by herself holding the car keys. Now, the investigators are fearful that if they don't approach quickly enough, she'll be able to get into the car and drive off. Officer Chris, positions himself between Letecia and the white Jetta. And as soon as Letecia sees him, he has his vest. She knows what's going on. He starts talking to her and she basically just kind of freezes. She starts backpedaling, walking backwards. And then she turns around and takes off on a full ass sprint. So now there is a police chase going on in this plaza, at which point Letecia takes the car keys and she chucks them across the parking lot. They continue to chase her, at which point other officers are getting involved. They have to reveal their guns, take their guns out and tell her to stop. Letecia does stop. She drops to the ground, but she is causing a scene. She is hysterical. Officer Chris describes that simultaneously, Harley is coming out of the store. Now, they don't want to freak her out, but they approach her and she has the cell phone that they need to get. She has it in her hand. They start asking her to give it to them, but she is kind of hesitant. at which point they and he says, they like yank it out of her hands. Now, while they're talking to Harley, Leticia's acting a fool on the ground. She is yelling, telling her daughter, don't say anything, don't say anything. And then she says, request a lawyer, request a lawyer. They tell Letecia, you need to calm the heck down or we're going to charge you with like disorderly conduct. That is when Letecia then calms down. They place Harley in the back of one of the cars, but they don't close the door. No one is arrested at this point. They're just trying to control the situation. Officer Chris then describes that they're able to take the white Jetta into custody, and they're also able to take the cell phone. And I failed to mention this, but this all happened between 1 and 2 p.m. Dr. Leon Kelly testified next, and he was the county coroner. And of course, he described Gannon's autopsy. Marissa Williams was a detective with the El Paso County Sheriff's Office, and she described that very strange interview with Letecia Stauch that day. Was it like 2 days after Gannon went missing? Detective Williams also spoke about the rental agreements because remember, Letecia had rented 2 vehicles after Gannon went missing. So she talked about how they went in and they got those rental agreements and all that. The state and the defense also stipulated to introduce some documents, some financial documents from USAA and also from American Express. Next up was a young woman by the name of Janine Sanchez. She was Harley's friend and coworker, and she also lived in Larson Ranch, which is the community where Letecia and her family lived when Gannon went missing. It's during her testimony that we learn that Janine and Harley were the ones that picked up Letecia from the hospital that day after her police interview. We also learned that during the week that Gannon went missing, Harley had asked Janine if she could spend the night at her house. Well, anyway, at one point, Janine, Harley, and Letecia are all in the vehicle. Letecia is in the backseat. And I'm not sure, we don't get a date. I don't remember if it was the day like she left the hospital. But anyway, at one point, the 3 of them are in the vehicle and Letecia makes kind of a weird comment, or Janine says this is a weird comment. She says something to the effect of, I hope you don't think we're all murderers. Now, Janine doesn't really find this funny. She thinks it's weird, but she doesn't know any better, so she just continues. At one point, when Janine is in the front passenger seat, she thinks it's odd that Letecia takes Harley's phone from the front, and then Janine gets a text message from Harley's phone, clearly written by Letecia, that says, "Can my mom stay with you as well?" Janine doesn't feel totally comfortable, but she agrees to it. She also recalls that in the car during the same conversation, Letecia instructs Harley, or she basically says, "I'm turning off your location services. You have to do it." And the last witness for week 1 of Leticia's trial is a woman by the name of Nicole Mobley. Now, Nicole Mobley is a member of the Larson Ranch community, and she is a real MVP in this case. So Nicole starts, in the beginning of Nicole's testimony, we don't really know what she's going to say. She starts off her direct examination discussing that she met Letecia in December of 2019. She was on the community Facebook page and she was having her niece come and stay with her. She requested clothing. She said, hey, if anybody has any clothes in this size or whatever, please let me know. She got a Facebook message from Harley saying, hey, I got some clothes that I can donate to you. Nicole was used to people when they do donations or buying or selling things doing what we call a porch drop off, where you just drop the items off, you put the money under the mat, that kind of thing. On this particular day, she thought that was what was going to happen. However, the person who dropped off the clothes ended up being Letecia, and I'm not sure if she knocked, but in any event, Nicole and Letecia got into a conversation. Nicole wasn't super comfortable with the conversation because she had just met this woman. She didn't know her from Joe Schmo on the street. And Letecia starts confiding in her. She starts talking about her home life is sucky and yada, yada, yada. And the woman's just kind of like, haha, okay, bye. And so Letecia takes the clothes and she leaves. A few days after Christmas, Nicole describes that she got another message. It's unclear if she got the message from Harley's Facebook account or from Leticia's Facebook account, but she knew that the person who was communicating was Letecia. Letecia had reached out to her basically saying, hey, I'm going to Orlando for some sort of flight attendant school. My house is going to be on its own. I was wondering if your niece could come to my house to house sit. However, she does say that the house wasn't going to be alone at all. She says, I want her to come house sit and also to come hang out with my daughter, Harley. I want her to have friends, and she doesn't really have a ton of friends. Now, Nicole doesn't really get a good vibe from Letecia. She's not going to send her poor little niece to go house sit for this woman who's not all there and then, kind of force her to be friends with her daughter. Okay. There is not much communication between Letecia and Nicole until January 27th, when somebody posts on the Larson Ranch community Facebook page that 11-year-old Gannon is missing. Now, Nicole is like, I didn't even know that Letecia, this random woman who had showed up at my house, I didn't know she had a stepson. She had heard about Harley. She had heard about the young stepdaughter, who's 8 years old. She heard that Letecia was married to some army guy who, according to Letecia, was gone most nights, but she never heard about Gannon. But anyway, Nicole is one of those people who she hears something going on. She wants to be an active member of the community. So as soon as she heard that Gannon was missing, she immobilized the community, and 40 to 50 people went out that same day on January 27th. I'm talking about people were outside looking for Gannon before the police had even showed up at Letecia's house by 10 p.m. that night. Now, Nicole describes that when she went out searching, I'm not sure if it was before or after, she messaged both Harley's Facebook account and Letecia's Facebook account, basically asking hey, we heard that Gannon is missing. Where should we search? And the crazy thing is that Letecia and Harley then blocked Nicole from messaging them, which is what? Now, this is the first day that Gannon is missing, right? So Nicole is already feeling some sort of way about the situation. Nicole says that all the people were out there. She says it was raining or snowing or something. She says because they were out there for a ton of hours. They were there from before the cops got to Letecia's house until after midnight. She says that by the time she got home, she was soaking wet. She, however, was so bothered by this situation, she wanted to find out where Gannon was, that at some point between when Gannon went missing and February 19th, she created a fake Facebook account. And then she started communicating with Letecia. And it was weird because when Nicole, resident of Larson Ranch, had Facebook messaged Letecia, she blocked her. But when Nicole messaged her under a Facebook account, she took a different approach, Nicole did. Nicole decided she wanted to befriend Letecia. And having watched everything that was going on in the media and how Letecia clearly did not get along with Gannon's mother, she basically used that angle to get her foot in the door, and it worked because Letecia started messaging her back. Now, during the direct examination, the prosecution focused on a conversation that happened on February 19th. It was a 2-hour long, it wasn't like a voice conversation, it was a text message exchange. But anyway, Letecia and this woman who she doesn't know is Nicole, they're communicating on Facebook Messenger. But then Letecia is like, hey, let's use this other app to communicate because it's more private. It's when they're communicating through this other app that Letecia finally says something about someone else being present at the house when Gannon went missing. Now, Nicole, fake Nicole, because, right, Letecia doesn't know that it's Nicole, she's trying to go a different angle. She basically says hey, I know as a mom, we can get really frustrated. She's thinking that maybe Letecia will say, hey, I snapped and I did something to Gannon. However, Letecia doubles down, but then she asks Nicole to do something. And she says, I'll pay you whatever I need to. She goes, if you could somehow just tell people that while you were searching outside for Gannon, that you saw a man leave my house with a green suitcase and Gannon and this blanket that he had. At which point, Letecia then sends Nicole a message with a picture in it, and it's the picture of Gannon sleeping in bed that morning, wrapped in his blanket. Mind you, when Gannon is eventually found under the Escambia River Bridge in the green suitcase, he has this blanket with him. Now, when they presented this picture during the trial, Nicole gets really choked up, and it's really, really sad. You can tell she's a true crime junkie, and she really just wanted to help. And so when Nicole gets this information from Letecia, she's like, I'll do whatever you need me to do. You don't need to pay me. And Letecia makes it clear, not only does she want to just her to tell anybody, she wants Nicole specifically to call Al and give him this information. Now, if you're tracking, we have a pretext call from February 13th and February 14th that is on recording where Letecia is making up all these stories. You have this message between Nicole and Letecia from February 19th. You see, the prosecution is just trying to put together this puzzle for the jury. After Nicole received this information from Letecia, that's when she took the messages and went to the police. The defense did a short cross-examination of Nicole, but after they were done with that, the trial broke for the weekend. I would like to point out that during week 1 of trial, the prosecution did bring in the green suitcase for the jurors to actually take a look at. So I know that the jury saw a lot this week. Not only did they see pictures, but they also saw the suitcase where little Gannon's body was discovered in. They also got to see evidence of the fragments of the bullets that were discovered in Gannon's head and then also in the suitcase. And honestly, I can only imagine that any trial that has to do with a murder, but in this trial specifically, I just can't imagine that a juror will walk away from this trial without some form of post-traumatic stress disorder. One more thing that I want to say before I finish my recap of week 1 is that at some point during the week, I believe it was day 2, the jury sent the judge a message. They were wondering, one of the jurors basically said, "Hey, judge, we've noticed that Letecia is sitting over there at the defense table and she's mouthing a lot when people are testifying or saying certain things." They wanted to know, are we allowed to take this into consideration or do we just ignore it? As soon as the judge received that message from the jury, the jury was out of sight now at this point. I think it was day 2 or day 3. The judge presented this to the prosecution and defense, and they were like, "Hey, what do we do?" They all wanted time to think about it. At least the defense did. On Friday, after trial let out, the judge did keep the attorneys behind and asked the question again, "What do you want me to do?" The judge came up with the proposition, "I am inclined to not do anything, to basically just ignore the question, and then we can maybe approach it at the end of trial," right? And the reason why the judge said this initially was because they don't know what the defense's strategy, if any, is going into the defense. Now, if Letecia takes the stand, her demeanor throughout the entire trial is going to be considered evidence. So the judge didn't want to give an early kind of like jury instruction. And so both the prosecution and the defense agreed. But I do think it's wild because Letecia is, kind of acting weird. She's doing the whole hair thing. I didn't notice that she had been mouthing anything because she's too far from the camera that's recording. Although on Friday, now it looks like they moved one of the cameras closer to the defense table so that we can actually be watching her a little bit more closely. So anyway, with that, that is the recap for week 1. Make sure that you're following me because I will be providing weekly, I'm going to try to provide you weekly updates. But also, if you follow me on Instagram at Military Murder Podcast, I do stories on there whenever I'm able to kind of hop onto the trial and listen to little snippets. I do little snippets on my Instagram stories. So make sure that you follow me there at Military Murder Podcast and make sure that you subscribe to this channel so that you don't miss a recap. Bye.